here, the African Union has had the interoperability framework for digital ID for some time. But we also have the African Free Trade Agreements, which are also pushing forward digital ID. In ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, they also have their digital master plan, which, no surprise, pushes forward digital ID for interoperability between the states, largely for trade. So how do we build a successful digital identity system? Ultimately, we have to focus on user needs. This is the most vitally important part of any system design, as we well know, but particularly with digital identity. Why? Because digital identity should be largely transparent. What we don't want to do is create a barrier between people and the services they vitally need by introducing something that's complex or hard to use. But behind all of that, we need to make sure that we're identifying the people who are enrolling into these identity systems consistently and to high levels of trust. We have standards to do this. There are things that currently exist, like NIST 863A, which allow us to understand how to do identity verification. But there are others, the European Union, for example. One of the key elements of all of this, though, is to get to the higher levels of trust. Biometrics help us to do that, and we'll hear more about that as we go forward this morning. I mentioned the European digital identity and the wallets that it's creating, but also mobile driving license and the standards involved with that. And we're now moving on to the challenge of use cases. But behind all of this, we have strong standards that exist now. The ISO standards, 18013, particularly -5 and -7 for mobile driving license, vitally important. The W3C for a while now has had the verifiable credentials data model. We have DIDs so that we can have decentralized identifiers. And we have strong protocols that allow developers to build reliable systems based on these technologies from the OpenID Foundation, which helps us to create these systems more quickly and with the skills we already have. We need to make sure that the ecosystem is trusted. Why? Because as consumers, we want to be able to interact with the system and feel safe. But also reliant parties, services, want to understand that you really are who you claim to be when you present, and that things will be safe and resilient and reliable. Again, standards and certification based upon those standards and assurance processes that go alongside that play a vital role in all of this. So where does biometrics fit in? If we think about digital identity when we first started designing it, we started with inclusion and usage as our driving features. We wanted everybody to be involved. We wanted to push use cases. But now, one of our primary concerns is protecting that ecosystem against attack. And biometrics helps us to do that. We all know about deepfakes and AI-generated documents, and they're a major threat. They're incredibly capable these days. This is why we need to think about how we protect the systems with things like protecting against injection attacks. And we'll hear more about that later. One of the other things that digital identity needs is it needs strong evidence from trusted sources. And this is where governments have a key role. We talk about decentralized systems quite often these days when we talk about digital identity. But the reality is, without centralized government services and data sets, we can't reach the high levels of trust that we really want to get to. So that evidence is vitally important. Biometrics themselves allow us to verify the identity of individuals and create unique IDs, for example. But they also help us to prevent fraud. They stop me from applying for things multiple times. They stop me from pretending to be somebody I'm not. But only if we implement them responsibly, and that's very important. To do so, we have safeguards. The data we're dealing with in biometrics is incredibly sensitive and unique to us as individuals. We want to use it responsibly. So security, privacy, ethical considerations are vitally important in the design of any of these systems. I want to leave you with a closing thought. more and more we use digital identity as an enabler for digital services, the more and more we put ourselves up for the chance of industrialized attack. And by that, I mean by our adversaries being able to programmatically attack us. This didn't happen when I used to go into an office and present my documents across a desk to an official. There was a real-world stopgap. That doesn't exist when we go digital. So it's vitally important that we protect against those things, and biometrics is part of our armory to do that. My belief is that digital identity has gone beyond just an enabler, and is now actually part of critical national infrastructure for many countries. And as we all develop, will become more and more so, because it's the gateway to digital services. It protects against many of the attacks we may have by ensuring that we understand who individuals and organizations are. And what I would say is that digital identity is actually critical national infrastructure and not just digital public infrastructure. Thank you very much.
So yes, industrialized attack. This is a good phrase that I've just picked up, and we will return to that topic just now. So we're going to do questions with Slido in about a little more than an hour at the end of this session, 25 minutes of Q&A. So use Ballroom A on the Slido tab of the app. And so, yeah, so questions for Adam, go to Slido, and then questions for me when my slides arrive. So my name is Patrick Grother. I am a scientist for the US government in a lab called NIST outside Washington, DC. It's part of the US Department of Commerce. And I'm also chair of SC37, which is a subcommittee within ISO and IEC, and we do biometric standards. So I'll touch on a lot of that now. So I'm just going to talk about a number of topics in biometrics that I hope are salient and relevant to the topics today. So learn to use this thing. Yeah, so there's NIST. We're a measurement lab. We have an information technology lab within the organization. And we have a computer security division, and we have an information access division. And I am been working in biometrics since the mid-1990s. And we are famous for running face recognition benchmarks and fingerprint recognition benchmarks. But we are also famous for this document that Adam mentioned also. And this is a standard, essentially, NIST Special Publication 863, which today is going into revision 4. And this is split into 4 documents, 4 PDFs, or 4 web pages. And you can see those parts there. Digital identity guidelines is the overarching topic, but proofing and authentication and federation are the different parts. Now, this has been under revision for a couple of years now. We expect, I think it's in the last stages of final publication, so you should see it soon. It includes new topics, such as passkeys, syncable authenticators, also attack detection and the use of one-to-many biometrics. So just to set the context for NIST. But let's talk about biometrics. Biometrics are used, of course, in documents. And we often hear the word foundational ID. And there's been a bit of debate, really, recently about whether a passport is a foundational ID document. And of course, it's issued by a government. Of course, it has cryptographic protection with a very well-tested and well-developed chip. But where did the photo come from? Was it collected in a trusted manner, or was it collected, was it submitted over a remote internet connection? My Washington, DC driving license is always collected, the photo is always collected in person, but there's no chip and no cryptographic protection. So we have to worry about the physical integrity of the document. We have solutions on the horizon, like cryptographically signed 2D barcodes. The key point here is to analyze your chain of handling of the biometric data to understand where it came from. Was there an opportunity for attack and injection or replacement or tampering of the biometric data, and what you can do to defend against that? So that's a topic. If we're going to put biometrics on QR codes, and this has been a big topic of discussion this week, and it will be talked about again this afternoon, we wonder what size biometrics we can do. It turns out, take a face image down to about 1 kilobyte to put it on a QR code, any payload, down to below 1 kilobyte, if you're going to sign it and protect it. So the different modalities, of course, we don't have to use faces. We could use fingerprints, and we could use standard fingerprint templates. We could put iris images on, but iris images only go to 2 kilobytes, too big. Minutia templates are small enough. Face can be small enough. Templates from companies, these are the proprietary representations of biometric data that are used in matching operations. They vary considerably in size, from maybe 100 bytes up to 4 or 5 kilobytes, or higher in iris recognition. So templates can go on 2D barcodes, they can certainly go on chips, images can go on chips, but size is important, and you have to track that and think about it. Just to note that templates are not always standardized. For fingerprints, we have a standardized minutia template with proven interoperability, which is measured in a test campaign from my lab called MINEX. But for face recognition and iris recognition, we do not have standard templates. If you're using a template, it is a potential for vendor lock-in if you don't retain the original image. So standard templates have been proposed in both domains, but there are good reasons, not just industrially protecting reasons, to not have standard templates. Yeah, so that's the scene with templates. A topic that keeps getting mentioned is whether templates, which are the representation extracted from an image, if you've got a template, can you go back and get an image? Now, this is a topic of research. The Swiss lab that Stephanie Schuckers is present at and will join us from later has been working on this topic. Can you reverse a template, invert a template, and get a recoverable, recognizable image? And the answer is yes, but it's difficult. And it depends what level of access you have to the machinery that made the template in the first place. Do you have access to data? Do you have access to the algorithms and the models? Sometimes the leading research will give you an invertible template and give you an image that you can look at. But oftentimes it will fail. And so this is research, but you shouldn't depend on irreversible templates unless you are using one of the new generation of irreversible templates. These are templates that have been made with mathematical template protection procedures that have been tested to give you template irreversibility. They are not common within the industry, but they do exist. Okay, moving along. So face recognition accuracy continues to improve. I was in Cape Town last year and I showed a very similar chart to this. And this is how often you fail to authenticate people using images of the kind that would be used in typical identity processes. 5 different databases, and the error rates have come down by orders of magnitude in now an 8-year period. And this is for one particular developer, but this exists for many developers. And what it says is that recognition error rates have got so low that the kinds of images that you would be using are now going to be matched. And the only sort of remaining sources of error would be poor quality, which you should take steps to avoid. Long-term aging, which unfortunately we can't avoid except by recollecting samples. And of course in children, and children is maybe a topic that's relevant to you or maybe not. That's sort of a policy question, but children age quite quickly. And so there are residual errors within biometric matching operations due to rapid growth. But so permanence, of course, happens. This is the time evolution of me. In face recognition, I think we all understand appearance changes. Fingers and iris are considered to be much more stable, but they are, of course, not immune to injury, acute injury, manual labor, or accidents, and also disease. So various conditions can affect skin, and various conditions can affect eyes, also the face. So that is another topic, but biometric data permanence is largely a solved problem. Many face recognition applications today will authenticate over a 10-year period easily. Beyond that, things get a bit more difficult, and you have to pay attention to which developer, which algorithms are using, because some are much better than others. In children, we produced this data recently in response to a government query we got, and children are aging very, very rapidly, so that 120 days for babies is a long time. And of course, babies don't look at the camera, they don't necessarily behave, but facial evolution is causing error rates to be probably unusably high, not dependably high. And so this, in fingerprints and iris and in face recognition, this remains a bit of a problem. For fingerprints, there was a very nice talk at ID for Africa in 2019. And the fine ridge structure has been shown in academic research to stabilize at something like 6 months. But still, the finger grows thereafter. And contemporary fingerprint sensors that have been the mainstay of fingerprint recognition for decades now, 500 pixels per inch sensing, don't really do it. They're not sufficient in young children. So there's been a lot of academic research, and all of it conceives of using sensors that are collecting higher resolution photos of fingerprints. The best research in 2020 used a quite inexpensive open source camera specification, and I've given a link to that in the center of this slide. And this is an indication that this can be solved. There are companies sponsoring ID for Africa this year that are producing sensors that are also capable. But the key point about biometric recognition in this case is that we need sensor interoperability. That if we use a high-resolution sensor, we can authenticate using that high-resolution sensor. If we have to go cross-device, then all I can say at the moment is do some testing before you try to do that, and ensure that you've got the technical infrastructure to be able to do it, the optical resolution. And this is true also for non-contact imaging. If you're doing non-contact device to non-contact device, you will have considerable success. If you're matching across domain to traditional contact imaging, then again, I would recommend testing. We have some standards that are coming along, testing standards, imaging standards, and test methods for testing those, but they are not quite in place yet. So yeah, this interoperability, sensor interoperability remains a challenging topic. Back to face recognition, and we still have twins. We ran a conference a month ago, and a CTO of a quite prominent face recognition developer claimed that twins would never be possible to separate twins. Twins give false matches. Two twins can use the same passport. And that we wouldn't have solutions. And that is quite a remarkable claim from a CTO. The unfortunate truth of this is that this also extends to sisters and other siblings. So you can get false positives from family members. And the recommendation, at least for twins, would be if you're enrolling them into, say, a national identity scheme, that you would put a bit in your database that says, is this a twin or not, or a multiple? Triples occur too. And I mention twins because it's not a rare topic. 3% of births within the United States in recent years have been twins. That percentage, of course, is influenced by modern reproductive technology, IVF, and people having babies later in life by choice. But natural variation of twins is particularly high in Africa. This has been documented. And lower in Asia. But it's not uncommon. 2%, 3%, maybe 4% in some places. The trouble with twins, and we don't expect them to twins to affect fingerprints or iris, but just face recognition, is that it causes you to not to be able to operate at very low false positives. So if you're doing duplicate detection in one-to-many, then you can anticipate having cases where you get an apparent false match, but it's actually from a twin or from a sibling. But the only way to decide, of course, is to use human adjudication. Or you could use another modality. You could use fingerprints, or you could use iris. And so in Singapore, and of course in India, famously, Indonesia, multimodal enrollment was necessary for one-to-many deduplication because it would also not have this twins issue. Human capability to look at faces, of course, is very good with familiar faces, but with unfamiliar faces, it becomes difficult. This has been studied for many years now, and human capability is not good. Some people are naturally better than others. Training can have an effect, but not always. This slide is from Norway. The police colleagues in Norway who also run the border, they offer free training. And I will include this link again in a little bit. So now I'm going to move on to attack. Stephanie is going to talk about this in more detail, but I will mention some topics, and they're worth repeating. So, yeah. Attack, of course, can happen when we go from the analog domain, that's me now on stage, to the digital domain when a photographer takes a photo of me. And there's an opportunity for attack there. So is the presentation legitimate? Is it me? Or is somebody trying to make a presentation attack? Are they holding up an iPad and showing my face to the camera? In the digital side, once you've digitized it, there's this opportunity for injection. Do you trust the hardware? Has the hardware been manipulated in some way? And with tablets and phones today, there are opportunities for introducing images into the digital stream. Now, how often does this occur? And this is the million-dollar question. We have a proportion of all transactions that will be illegitimate, subversive presentation or subversive transaction. And that fraction X, it could be 1 in a million, it could be 1 in 100,000, it could be 1 in 100. It's a good idea to try and estimate the likelihood of an attack happening in your system on enrollment or on authentication, any phase of the operation. And of course, this depends on what are the incentives, what are the opportunities, what is the risk. And of course, these things can change in time. The opportunities and the rewards for making an attack can be very, very large. And this is a new story that was prominent, I think, in the last 12 months, when a company was victim to a face video injection attack. Now, there are really 3 populations in biometric systems, those that are cooperative and understand the process, but we have a proportion in the middle there that have trouble using a system, And both of these, both Z and X, we would like to minimize to avoid problems. You also have to think about the capability of an attacker. So if you've got an attack going on, is it really just an amateur attack, or is this a nation-state attack? Adam mentioned industrialized attack earlier. So it could be organized crime, it could be criminals operating at scale, repeatably in various jurisdictions over the internet. Different people have different capabilities, different levels of effort, and different willingness to do this. This is a figure from an ISO standard. You've seen this before, I'm sure, on presentation attack. We ran a benchmark on this, and we will do so again later this year. We last ran this benchmark, I think, in 2023, and we will resume doing this in conjunction with other US government colleagues. We are running software-only passive detection attacks. They will run active attacks, where people will actually hold phones and present to cameras and expect the mechanisms exist to detect liveness in both settings, active and passive attack detection. Injection. I think I've lost the microphone. It's back. So injection is a topic that you've heard about this week. Injection can occur digitally inside a phone, but it can also occur when I submit a paper photo to a passport office, and that paper photo has been manipulated. It gets scanned and it ends up in an authoritative government database. It's a different form of injection. What would be injected? A photo of a real person, maybe. A deep fake to make an entirely new identity. It could be a morph, so that two people can use one credential. Or it could be a real-time face swap, and I will show you that in just a second. If I'm going to impersonate somebody else, I need to get a sample from somebody else. Now, that's very easy to do for face. Your faces are available in the digital world often. They're available in the physical world. I could take a photo of you in this room now. Fingerprints and iris, that becomes substantially more difficult. It has been demonstrated, it has been that you can do it, but optically it's more difficult in the physical world. And of course, digitally, we don't place our fingerprints in easily available repositories like we do with face. So that's something to think about, protection of biometric data at the source. Deepfakes are another thing. If you're going to establish many, many identities in an identity system, you can industrially manufacture face images. Many mechanisms to do this nowadays, most of them built on AI. And more recently, you can produce multiple photos of a person, of a synthetic person, doing all sorts of things in all sorts of settings. So you can establish an identity, say, on Facebook. Yeah. And of course, an investigator who suspects a deepfake might go looking on things like Facebook to see, does this person really exist? When of course they don't. There was a case that was discussed in the press recently, and it was discovered by researchers at Stanford University that this person in the top right-hand corner, who didn't exist, was connected to a lot of powerful people in Washington, D.C. in foreign policy circles, and had a LinkedIn profile with a photo, but oddly, the photo had telltale signs that it was in fact a deepfake. There's a report, and I've linked to it at the bottom left here, about deepfakes. And it's a pair of reports published after a 2-year study period in the US on the problem of deepfakes, which goes beyond biometrics and identity, and then some mitigations. And again, I included links. This is a demo that colleagues of mine put together very recently. And this is about face swap. And it's actually a video, but I didn't want to gamble and show you the video. But what's going on here is that we've got a minute of video, and the legitimate presenter in this video has his face swapped out to the other people that are presented on the gallery photos here. And then, as we go through this, oh, I see the video. I did include the video. So you can see this, and eventually we'll get to the face swap. Right, so then the identity is changed, and matching against that identity matters. Now, why does this matter to you? If you suspect somebody is presenting a deepfake identity to you, or a fake identity, you might interview them, and you might summon them on a Zoom connection, and you might talk to them. Well, over that Zoom connection, they could be injecting real-time a face-swapped video using AI, using tools that are quite easily available now, readily available. Now, of course, it requires some effort. Matching will work, so if face recognition is your defense here, it's not good enough. You need some attack detection in this setting. A few slides on morphing. I should pay attention to time here. Yeah, I think we have plenty of time. So morphing, many of you, of course, will understand what that photo on the left is. We have two presidents who were in office for 8 years each. So we saw their faces many times. Intuitively, we understand that that face on the left is a morph. Now, what's the problem with morphs? The problem with morphs is that if you don't know the people involved, you have no idea, without careful analysis, of knowing whether those photos are morphs. And I've given you the answers here. Sometimes I ask the question to the audience, but it's difficult to tell, especially with a good morph detector. Now, human capability to analyze morphs has been tested more recently, and a link to that research there. But what's the problem? If we can get a morph onto a document, if the process is vulnerable to including a morph, then we have a credential, face recognition based here, but potentially with other modalities, that can be used by two people. And that has been demonstrated in operational tests recently, that works. Morphing tools are readily available. There are many of them. Some of them make bad morphs, morphs where you can readily discern that this is not a legitimate image. But some of the morphs are essentially indistinguishable by a human from a real photograph. And various tools, some of them are fast, many of them are free. So many tools to do this. And a problem, once you've got a passport issued or a credential, then two people can use it. And if you use e-gates, which are common now, many passport holders can use an e-gate in many countries, then that e-gate will open and let both people through. And this has been demonstrated operationally. So the solution, before I go any further, is trusted capture. I'm going to give you some technical solutions going forward, but they're imperfect. They don't always work. And if you want to take anything away from this discussion on attack and morphing attack, is trust your capture. Now, the German government understood the problem of morphing in recent years, and they have moved within the last 12 months that all passport photos will be collected in person in a trusted local government office. Whether that's possible in a big country, I don't know. It's going to vary by jurisdiction, of course. But trusted capture is the solution here. Otherwise, we go to technical solutions. Now, trusted capture doesn't have to be in person. In the United Kingdom, there are photo booths that are on the market. And of course, you can't do an injection because the hardware here is trusted and has tamper protection. The photo goes directly to the passport office, but these are still vulnerable to presentation attack. I could sit in the booth and present a photo for somebody else. So again, you need to deploy defenses against attackers. You need to assess how likely it is that somebody will attack, and then employ defenses. So back to morph detection, we are in a good position because we have two methods for morph detection that are philosophically very different. They apply at different phases of the operation. So when I apply for a passport, you can do something called single image morph detection. You can look at the image and you can try to determine, is it a morph? But you can also do it in the immigration lane or at the point of authentication. Now you have two images. You have the suspected morph on the document, but also a live photo that you know, because you've got trusted hardware in your airport, is not a morph. So there are two opportunities at the passport office and during immigration. And they work differently. The single image, you're again looking for artifacts. The morphing tools put two photos together. They make one photo. That photo will have some artifacts. They may be difficult to detect. There is software out there to detect those artifacts. Maybe humans can detect those artifacts too. But we would like automated tools. Differential morphs work by understanding that when you morph me with Dr. Attic, the photo doesn't really look like either of us. It looks a little bit like me, it looks a little bit like Dr. Attic, and a face recognition engine will produce outputs that give you an indication that there's something wrong with a photo. And so that's another vehicle for morph detection. We've tested these things. Single image morph detection will work when it has seen the morph preparation tool in the past. You can get very low error rates there, and these tools are now available at least for flagging morphs in operations for human review. Differential morphs work also, and they work more reliably, but not as well. So single image morph detection will not work at all if the morph detector has never seen the particular morph before. So we have morph detection in operations. We're producing a document to guide you on what you would do if a morph detector actually gives you a candidate morph, and what forensic follow-ups you would do when you find a morph. So there's a summary. The gold standard is trusted capture. Across all biometric steps of an operation, if you're worried about presentation attack, injection attack, morphing attacks, then trusted capture, trusted processes are the way to go. Otherwise, you have software means of detection. There are some developers here this week that will talk to you about this, and they will sell you products on this, which may have operational viability. So that concludes my part of the presentation. That was the biometric session. Questions, again, to Slido Ballroom A, which we will tackle in about 30 minutes. But right now, I'd like to invite Stephanie Schuckers to join us by Zoom. And hopefully, the Zoom connection is alive and well. And Stephanie, of course, is a professor in the United States. She has also been working very heavily with the FIDO Alliance. And also, she runs the CITA consortium of universities doing cutting-edge research. And that's why she is in Switzerland at the moment. Stephanie, are you there? We see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm very disappointed not to be joining you in person. So hopefully maybe there'll be a future opportunity for that. Just checking to make sure everything's going okay for audio. Well, I'm going to assume so. unless I hear otherwise. And so I think there'll be some slides that are coming. So I'm going to spend some time digging a little bit more into the liveness aspect, presentation attacks and presentation attack detection, as well as injection attacks and injection attack detection. And then I'll get a little bit into, oh, it looks like they'd like me to share slides. Hold on one second here. Share slides. Hopefully, there we go. And let me put it in presentation mode.
We see them, yes.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so as I said, I'm going to focus in. I use the term liveness, and I'll kind of as a general term and something that people really kind of understand. And I'll get back to a little bit why I'm using liveness, because we'll be talking about solving two problems that Patrick nicely described, which are presentation attack detection and injection attack detection, or injection attacks and presentation attacks. The solutions are these detections. And so I put up some spoofing in the news, and I know Patrick also has talked about spoofing. And, you know, we've been working in this area for quite a long time. And always the question is, are presentation attacks or spoof attacks a real problem? While these examples seem, you may be kind of dated and old, for people I talk to that are running real large-scale systems, they are happening, and they're happening for real at quite the scale. And Patrick showed a nice slide on that. And I think part of the reason we see it, of course, much more now relates to, sorry, I need to get to the next slide, relates to the fact that biometric systems are becoming ubiquitous in many jurisdictions. Again, this quote is sort of in the early days of biometrics, and when biometrics was being considered for use, you know, first for identity verification, but also then for further subsequent authentication. You know, the question is this something we can use? Because it was thought of like a password, and a password we don't want to be stolen, you know, because it then could be used. And I feel like the statement, it's liveness, not secrecy, that counts. Obviously, one of the concerns related to face is its wide availability to get someone's face. But even, and of course, you know, attacks all come with risks, and that risk increases the more available the information is. But liveness and presentation attack detection and injection attack detection is kind of your last line of defense. Even if something like a fingerprint is stolen, you are able to detect it because you have the tools to do so. And so that's the key piece to biometrics. And if I can't emphasize it enough, I'm going to do it one more time on another slide, and I'll come back to vocabulary, which is we think of biometrics as a comparator, right? We create a template, a trusted template, you know, hopefully in your case. And then we match then at a later time against that trusted biometrics. So that's the matching part of biometrics, you know, but I put forth to you that it isn't a true biometric system unless you know what you're matching against. You know, do you know that you trust the template? Do you know that you trust the input at the biometric capture when you're trying to do an authentication? And so that's where liveness and pad and injection attack, as I get to, are critical for effective biometrics. So going back to vocabulary, just so we make sure we're all, there we go. So presentation attacks, you know, are the presentation of this artifact, you know, trying to interfere with this system, like spoofing, you know, or other means of interfering with our system. And presentation attack detection is one of the solutions, and liveness is part of that. All right, you've seen this already. These are the different attack points of a biometric, and a presentation attack is at the capture system. Presentation attack detection is the means to detect it, as well as, of course, you need security throughout the pipeline. And we'll come back to that. I did want to dig in just a tiny bit more. There was some mention of this in Patrick's talk as it relates to different types of solutions. Sorry, my slides are having a mind of their own here. Here we go. So I've said the word liveness, as we said, liveness is kind of part of it, in some sense. And so there are multiple ways to do presentation attack detection, and you will realize that when you talk to different potential providers. The term passive is often used, and so that's the use of liveness where there's no challenge response, right? There's no sort of interaction between the sensor and the person. And then there's two kinds of challenge response. That challenge response is that interaction, that dynamic aspect to an interaction between a person and the sensor. There can be both an involuntary response. Let's say you shine a light and your pupil dilates or constricts as a result of the light. And then there can be something that you ask the user to do. And some people call these two things as active pad, though I will point out it's not defined in ISO. But just I think the idea is that challenge or active pad, challenge response can be both voluntary and involuntary. One of the advantages of the involuntary type responses is that you're not asking the user to do something specific, which can be difficult for some users depending on what thing you're asking that user to do. And so it's just a usability consideration. I would say that also passive pad versus active pad or challenge response based pad may vary in terms of performance. And I don't want to say that one is better than the other, but I think you might find that people will put forth, that because of the possible difficulty of a person not being able to comply with a challenge response, that passive is better for usability. But it really is a very solution dependent thing as to whether usability is present. And so it's not about whether it's active or passive, it's about the actual solution. So this is where testing and evaluation is really important, and I will come back to it. Let's check my time. Okay. Here we go. So I just bring up the iPhone just because it is a solution for a biometric comparison, one that a lot of people may be aware of or used before, and Face ID. And so this is actually fairly dated in terms of the quote, but I don't have any information to say they're not still working this way. This to counter both digital and physical spoofs, True Depth Camera randomizes the sequence of 2D images and depth map captures and projects a device-specific random pattern. So what's going on here, right? So what's going on here is they have more than one camera. So they have a kind of hardware-based solution for this problem. They randomize things, the sequence of 2D images. So the 2D images is actually, they are projecting an image onto your face using near infrared. You can't see it because you can't see near infrared. And then they're looking for the pattern in response. So they're having a notion of a challenge response, through their process. And they're having a notion of a randomized aspect. So this makes it much harder for hackers to attack. And yes, I think hackers have demonstrated it's possible, but I also, the types of things that I hear about, as it relates to the iPhone, are very minimal in terms of attack because they've put up many, many protections. All right, let's move towards evaluation. So you do want to do an evaluation or ensure that the solution that you are planning to adopt has had an independent valuation, because this is going to tell you how effective the solution is, not only in detecting these types of attacks, but also the usability aspects of it, as I talked about earlier. So on our side, we've been doing competitions. These are not meant to be sort of the final assessment of a commercial systems, but more enabling, enabling to make the development of this technology more accessible to companies, because many solutions now are based on the need for data, data to understand. And you could imagine data as it relates to spoofing means you're actually creating spoofs and then capturing those. So we've been running competitions. We run them both on a sort of the technology side, where we're using only images and videos. And we also run tests of systems. So if people have prototype systems and they want free testing, we run these competitions regularly, and you can submit your system for testing, and we will test with live and spoofs in multiple modalities. We've done finger, face, iris, both contact-based fingers and contactless fingers. And our publications and our data sets are available for benchmarking in your own organization. I show this slide mostly to kind of give you an idea of the challenge. This is the error rate of our systems, and it's an average of both the genuine person, which is something called bona fide presentation classification error rate, BPCER, as well as the spoof side of the house, attack presentation classification error rate. And you can see we had a nice little decline and then a little bit of an uptick. I would say that this doesn't mean our solutions are actually getting worse. It's just that in our case, we can make the test harder from year to year to year. And that's what we've been doing because of the nature of the presentation attacks. All right, so I said that I would talk a little bit about deepfakes and deepfake attacks. And so I'm going to do that. And so what's the problem here? So this is the deepfake of a famous actor, Tom Cruise. And it's a very convincing deepfake, in part because they spent a lot of time creating it, as well as doing the face swap. So you've got your actor and you've got your real deepfake. However, as Patrick pointed out, the accessibility of these tools has significantly changed since this deepfake was created. And so it is quite possible and quite easy to do it yourself. I have an example also to show you, but I realize I maybe need to share sound because it's just more fun that way. So I'm going to do this again and make sure I can share my sound. And here we go. And it's not important because Patrick showed a nice example. We'll see if this works. So this is the original video clip. You may recognize it from a famous movies, Star Wars. And here we go.
Don't you? Yes. All right. I understand. Fine.
Now we'll go to the deepfake. Here we go.
Don't you? Yes. All right. I understand. Fine.
I assume you're seeing something because you haven't told me otherwise, but essentially this is the original. And here's the face swap, and I hope you can guess who it is. I grew up with these movies, and so it's been a bit of a dream. So I asked my students to do that, and I assume they were not snickering behind my back when I made this nice deepfake video of myself with a famous movie star. Let's go to the next. So we've been doing research around biometrics and many of the topics we're talking about today. One of the researchers as part of our community, our CIDR community, created this deepfake-o-meter. It's a website, and you could actually try it. It's an interface to open source algorithms that are designed to detect deepfakes. So what you do is you go to the website, you need to register, and then you can upload your deepfake, and you can select different algorithms, and all those algorithms have open source code behind it. And so it's an amazing resource, you know, to help you start to look at a deepfake problem. All right, so what's the problem with deepfakes? You know, the problem with deepfakes was it relates to biometrics. Is of course you could present your deepfake to the sensor, just like it's basically now a presentation attack, and we would detect it through that, you know, but you've heard a lot about injection attacks. So in this case, one of the advantages of doing it as an injection attack is you don't get the digital artifacts where you're taking a video of a video, which would make it easily detectable with presentation attack detection today. By injecting it, it keeps its original quality, and there's no, you know, double digitization errors, and it looks like a legitimate video was captured from a sensor. But of course, all is not lost. You know, we do have methods for deepfake detection, as I showed you with the deepfake-o-meter, and commercial solutions are out there. But challenge response actually is part of the solution to this. And so that's part of the reason why I spent a little bit of time talking about that at the beginning, because challenge response, you know, might actually help you when it comes to injection attacks. Why is that? Well, the reason the challenge response might help you is because that randomness is very difficult for an attacker to anticipate. And so if you can add some kind of random component to the challenge response, the person who's generating the deepfake needs to be able to anticipate, or maybe can't anticipate it at all. And so, you know, so let's talk just kind of where they're the same and where they're different. I mean, obviously where they're different is at what point in the chain the attack occurs. That we need different standards because of that, because how you might test it would be very significantly different. But some of the solutions do overlap. And so your kind of passive types of detection would obviously have to be trained with deepfake generation versus physical spoofs, but some of the other solutions may overlap between the two. All right, so now I'm kind of switch gears a little bit, and I think I have plenty of time, but Patrick, please do jump in if I'm not doing well on time. And so it's a very diverse landscape. There's lots of products out there, which is fantastic. Being in this field for a very long time, working on liveness detection, I'm super excited to just see the diversity of solutions, presentation attack detection solutions out there that work amazingly effectively. However, how do you know? You know, NIST has been testing matching for many, many years, biometric matching, so you have a resource. But that's just the one component of the system. There's the other components of the system that you need to be tested, and that includes presentation attack detection. And so, you know, what we want is an ecosystem of products where we can say these things are certified. So as an adopter, you need to be asking for certified products. So we do have certification schemes. Often a laboratory will have a bespoke scheme just for that specific laboratory. You might have a within country certification scheme. But what was lacking is sort of an international version, a network of laboratories that are interchangeable, where you can entrust what it's based on, which is, of course, ISO standard and defined by a group of subject matter experts. So this is the problem we tried to solve within the FIDO Alliance, and I will get to their certification program in a minute, but I want to just take 2 steps back and introduce the FIDO Alliance, because there's something amazing happen as it relates to authentication. And I know this conference is dealing mostly with identity on the first stage, but you have, when you subsequently want to identify something, we call that authentication, and we often use passwords, and we would like to move beyond that for the obvious reasons, which I'm not even going to get to because I assume this audience is aware of. So who is FIDO? This is at the board level. FIDO is worldwide organizations that cover the ecosystem as it relates to, both the hardware creation, the software and tech and platforms, as well as the people that rely on it: governments, banks, credit companies, consumer purchasing, etc. And this is the board level, but there's hundreds and hundreds of members from across the world. And you don't need to be a member to adopt FIDO, so I'll get to all of that. These are just the people that have been working on it, and if you want to be a member, of course, you're very welcome. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to get away from passwords. Security keys are out there, but are very only useful for certain use cases, and so we're trying to go over here. So what are we going over here for? We want our authentication to be grounded on cryptography. And so, certainly passwords have a cryptography, a hash, but it's a shared secret. It's a shared hash, right? And so we want asymmetric key cryptography. We like to make it easy for people. That's this part of the box. So we want it strong with cryptography. We want it easy, and we want it phishing resistant. So the solution, and it's been in development for quite a number of years, but it's gotten a name change within the last couple of years, or sort of a new brand or name, which is called passkey. So passkey is based on cryptography. So how does it all work? Essentially, what happens is when you want to enroll, you prove yourself with your biometric to your device, which is usually pre-set up, right, as part of your device. A private public key pair is generated for a particular relying party. The private key goes to, the private key stays on the device, and the public key goes to the provider. And then later on, when you want to authenticate, its challenge is sent. Your biometric unlocks the private key, which signs the request and gets sent back, and that can be checked with the public key. What's the advantage of this? Well, it's really 2 steps. You got your cryptography here, and you got your biometrics here. So you've got, basically like what you have and who you are. What you have here is this physical device, and who you are is this person. And I guess there's a bit of a what because this private key here can be checked. And so it's basically a replacement for passwords that we've used for authentication and other means like one-time passwords. And recently, there's newer syncing capabilities to help with usability. But I don't want to get too deep into all of this right now, but just to give you an idea that the specification is open, and what's super exciting is major operating systems offer passkeys built in the box, as well as browsers. And so it's something you can utilize today. What the job you have to do is, you're the relying party. You obviously have to enable support for it. And so if you want to use FIDO as part of authentication, you need to enable support for it. And there are many, many, many tools in order to provide that, enable it on the server side. Okay, so that's authentication. I just want to sort of now bring it all together back to, a lot of what you're here today talking about identity and mobile identity, and just, and I'm sure you've heard talks like this before, but I want to pull it all together in the context of FIDO. So the first step, of course, is account enrollment and identity verification. Once you've set up your account, you can now use it for authentication. And then if it turns out you might lose your device, or your device is stolen, or you're on a different channel on a new device, you might have to do something called account recovery and identity re-verification. Listed underneath are all the risks that have been alluded to, in terms of what happens in your account enrollment, worrying about presentation attacks and injection attacks and synthetic IDs, all the things that Patrick's and many others have discussed. As well as in user authentication, you worry about things like phishing, man-in-the-middle attacks, and some of these other injection and presentation attacks. And then you have your account recovery problem, which is how do you set your account up again and trust the person that has the account so they can enroll a new device. So what you want, of course, is secure enrollment, and that may include some kind of remote identity verification. And of course, any other things like we've talked about earlier. And then you want your phishing resistant authentication, which is the solution is passkeys, and you want a process for secure account recovery, which may mimic some of the earlier processes we talked for enrollment itself. So FIDO has a certification program for authentication, and so are many different protocols for FIDO authentication, but we also have certification for any type of identity verification that involves remote, not any type, but for certain types of certified remote identity verification. Now, this might be something that you do as a step after you issue an identity, a mobile identity document, a digital identity, that you may need to recheck that somebody is who they say they are, and in that case may choose to do a remote check for one reason or another, particularly if you're a relying party. And there can be interconnections between this and the original foundational identity to ensure it's the same person. So you want, if there's any stage that you're doing remote identity verification, you also want to consider it to be certified. So what does certification look like? Right now, certification for remote identity verification include a step of document authenticity, checking when you query this document remotely, either through RF query if it has an e-chip, or through a photo of the document that it's a legitimate document. I'm sure you've seen products that do this. Then there's a face verification step that includes both the matching against the original document as well as liveness. And so we have this kind of pair of programs that go together for remote identity verification. And then we have a biometric certification whenever it's used as a component within any system, but in particular, FIDO authentication. So what does this certification program look like? Well, again, I'll repeat why FIDO certification, which is based on all the ISO standards that we have in place for matching, testing of comparators, biometrics. It's called 19795, as well as spoofing, 30107, and we are working on, there is a new standard coming as it relates to injection attacks, and we're working on a program for certification around injection attacks. So it's based on ISO standards. You have basically a authority that works with stakeholders, in terms of defining the requirements, because just because there's an ISO standard doesn't mean there's actual requirements. You need requirements to decide when something's certified or not, and that's not defined in ISO. So that is what FIDO provides, and they use those experts from those many organizations, to define the requirements and test against the standard. As I said, then that is available through a network of laboratories. So you can choose your own laboratory and know you're getting something that would be recognized, across the world. So that's the value proposition. Underneath the hood, what are we doing? You're actually submitting a full system that includes the capture, the user interface, and all the components of the biometric match that we showed earlier with all those little boxes. And so we're testing what's called the false accept rate, or the probability two different people match, the false reject rate, the probability you're rejected when you shouldn't be, as well as presentation attack detection. We're doing testing, some testing around differential performance for different demographics. It's independent, and the laboratories are independent of verification or of results, and it conforms, as we talked about, to the ISO standards. So these labs get these systems and they actually do spoof testing, and they bring in real people. And that's one of the real values to it. It's very, very important to do technology tests, where you're looking at each of the components, but then you want to put everything together and do testing, all the components together, because that's going to give you a true understanding of your product and how well it works. And so, they make these spoofs, as it be finger or face or whatever the modality, and test the system, as well as bring in live subjects. We want to also make sure our technology works well for all. And so as part of the testing, one of the choices is to actually bring 245 subjects. This is our level 2 testing. And when we bring in the 245 subjects, we ensure they're in multiple age groups, genders are covered, as well as variations in skin tone, because as we know, biometrics potentially can vary in terms of performance, and this testing will then check that the system works for all the various groups. Now, it's only 245 subjects, but I think it's kind of a check after you do maybe a more deeper check, around something like the NIST testing. And so, because it's not only is the matcher impacted potentially by demographics, but the actual other components may be impacted by demographics. And that's why we need this last check. All right, so this is kind of the end. I like this slide because it's kind of reminding you about passkeys and this major evolution as it relates to authentication. I also want to just briefly mention the Biometrics Institute, who also has materials that are available to you. I throw up this slide as it relates to vulnerabilities because it has a lot of nice check sheets and answers in terms of FAQs and guidance. They also have other good practice material as it relates to biometrics, so check them out. All right, so I'm wrapping up. I don't know where I am on time, but just to summarize, presentation attack detection is the physical attacks, and the key message there is that you need both, but the comparator of the biometric plus your liveness to ensure there's a real legitimate person there to get success. Injection attacks bypass the biometric sensor. They're a digital attack, and they can be detected also, and there's a bit of an overlap as it relates to detection of injection attacks and presentation attacks. And so now we want to combine the comparisons with liveness detection, presentation attack detection, and injection detection for our success. And then we want certified solutions. And FIDO certification includes both live subject testing, pad testing, and fairness evaluation, developed by experts, has a network of laboratories around the world based on ISO standards. And right now, we don't have injection attack detections testing, but we're working on it. So stay tuned for that. I do want to thank, these are the members of CIDR that support the research that we do, that support the work that we do in terms of our competitions, our fundamental research, as well as the work we do in support of things like FIDO. And they're really critical to us, and we really thank them. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Please don't go anywhere. We've got 35 minutes for questions. Adam, if you would come up to the stage as well. Yeah, so we can still use Slido. It's been quite active recently, so I'm going to jump in, and the first one goes to you, Adam. You'll need a microphone. The first one goes to you, is something that you said at the end of your presentation of classifying digital identity as CNI rather than DPI, critical national infrastructure.
Yes.
The question is, what are the implications of doing that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when we think about the threats to our nation and we're using identity as one of the primary means of identifying individuals, we need to take that seriously. And the more and more we digitize systems, I talked about industrialized attack, we bring ourselves new threats. And we've seen through some of the other presentations, through Patrick and Stephanie as well, some of the ways that we can be attacked. So we need to start thinking about identity itself as being that critical part of our defense system. So it is critical national infrastructure. If it fails or if it's subverted and we're relying on it for access to services, that's a major issue. That could stop potentially millions of people accessing the services they desperately need. So yes, there's an implication. We need to take cybersecurity very seriously. We need to make sure that when we design systems, not only are we thinking about standards and that some of the biometric attacks that might happen that we've been discussing this morning, but also build into the design of systems security. Bring in security professionals when we're doing that. Make sure we appreciate that as a part of our design process and think about the types of attacks that might happen and then test constantly. Once we launch something, that's the point where we're really under attack. Everything we do in the lab is wonderful and helps, but real life is always the most dangerous. So yes, it has an implication. Yes, it will have a cost implication too. But if we don't do this, the damage it could do will be far greater.
And that damage is incurred by the citizen rather than the government? Or?
Well, unfortunately, often, yes. I mean, if my identity is compromised, for example, it's me, myself, who will suffer. Most likely, certainly in the short term, I won't be able to access certain things using my identity. But it could be that it enables huge frauds to happen as well, that can cost nations a huge amount of money.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Another one for you. How do you see EUDI influencing digital identity strategies in developing countries?
Well, EUDI, for me, is fascinating in that I was involved in the work with the European Commission as a member state before Brexit. So my involvement there goes back many years to the first version of the EIDAS regulation, which has now become EUDI, which was all about interoperability between member states and their ID systems initially. Now we have digital wallets. But the great thing that's happening for me in the EU is the way that legislation and technology is being developed in parallel. When we went through the first eIDAS regulation, we spent some years actually and multiple projects doing research into how we could achieve cross-border interoperability. Then we sat down as a group of experts from member states and wrote legislation, and then we implemented. It was a very linear process. Now what's happening is we have something called the Architecture Reference Framework in the EU, which we designed early on. And once we'd started to publish that, we started to work on implementation. We had things called large-scale pilots, which have been running for almost 2 years now. So we're actually testing and implementing a lot of this as we go along, and writing legislation as we go. The implementing acts, for example, many of which were only published a few months ago. This is an incredibly exciting time because we're legislating and designing and implementing in parallel. And that's actually driving forward a lot of the standards development as well, which is very exciting because it means that many things that we're seeing tested and implemented in the EU will be ready for everybody else to learn from. And all of this is going into open source as well, so we can all take a look at it and learn and build the elements of that that are relevant to us in our own country. So I think it's a marvelous way of driving things forward, and we can all gain from that.
Okay, yeah. On a sort of related topic, and it's a question directed at me, but I'm going to direct it at you instead, Stephanie. It says, if ISO standards like 30107 exist, but lack certified products and infra and accredited labs, how can compliance be enforced or even trusted in practice? So you mentioned FIDO's got a certification. 30107 STOPS has got very well-defined boundaries. Are there remaining gaps? I mean, FIDO has tried to fill them for its use case. But more widely, what do you think?
Yeah, I think an ISO standard is the foundational document of testing. It defines how you would do the test, what you need to consider, what you need to measure. And so it is a critical part of the system. But I think maybe what the tricky part, or the gap is that you need someone to actually implement the certification program based on the standard. So the question is, who should do that? And who decides what passes and what doesn't? The reason why the standard doesn't actually define that is because the use cases are so varied. And so they can't set a requirement for a performance that will be reasonable for all use cases. And so that's what FIDO does, is with the work that we do with the group of experts, we work together to decide what the actual requirements are. But ISO absolutely needs to be there. And so this is basically taking action on what ISO has, the guidance that the ISO has given, and then you make the decisions on the requirements, the actual number you're going to choose, and then you run the test, and the test is all run based on the ISO defined requirements or defined steps, and then you determine whether it's a certification. And you don't have to be part of the sort of network of laboratories to do an ISO test. But what I'm trying to motivate is one of the values of doing it this way is that you're not kind of getting lab lock-in, because a lab defined a test that was also based on ISO, but they define their own requirements that might be different from another lab's requirements, that might be different from another organization's requirements. And so we, in FIDO, defined the use cases of interest and then defined the requirements, and now you have many laboratories to choose from. And then FIDO is also the manager of the accreditation program. So they manage the labs, they make sure the labs are capable, they make sure all the documentation. So it's sort of like a certifier of the labs and an extra step to ensure the certification you get, right? You know, because right now you have the vendor and you have the lab and they work together, yes, but you need another person kind of overseeing all that process. And that's also what FIDO provides. Anyway, so I don't want to give the impression that ISO hasn't done their job. ISO is the foundation, and then this is just the next steps that need to be added on top.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. There's another couple of questions along the same lines, but before we go there, there's a question that's sort of implicitly about certification. I suppose it's a question to me. Should participation to NIST benchmark be mandatory or optional before procuring ABIS? Any minimal threshold should be met. What should be examined? So the NIST test benchmarks are extremely popular. We've had 400 developers now in a 7-8 year period, thousands of different algorithms tested. They're lab tests that run on archived data, and we do this not in any certification role. We measure things and we publish things. We influence metrics and test methods. It's certainly valuable to do. The industrial feedback is good, customer feedback is good, end user feedback is good. But we're not guaranteed to keep doing these things, particularly we're not guaranteed to keep doing them in the same way. And so we're about to incorporate a whole set of new data sets into our tests. So we're not guaranteeing sort of a certification against a fixed target here. Some people ask us for certificates that they've taken the test, and we can't do that. There's a lot more to procurement of an ABIS than just some accuracy result. Accuracy is part of it. Software stability, software support, threshold access, threshold management, database management, transaction costs or enrollment costs. All of this goes into play in a real procurement. Accuracy is one part of it. Certainly you can look at a NIST test result as informative of developer capability, but it's not a certification in and of itself. Yeah, so let's move on. We've got a lot of other questions here. I don't know who wants to take this, but when procuring a government-grade ABIS solution for one-to-one verifications in a population of 100,000 to 10 million, what are the relevant standards and requirements to look at? Stephanie, do you want to have a go at that? Or Adam? It's the most popular question we've been asked on Slido. So what relevant standards and requirements if you're in procurement of an ABIS?
I'll let Stephanie begin on that one, then I'll come in.
Yeah, so I think that a good question. I would say we didn't really answer that, so I think this is something to be looking for guidance. I would point people to the Biometrics Institute, who has their good practice framework, and through that good practice framework includes many, many, many of the things you need to consider. And what's neat about that is they have a lot of questions, right? So these are sort of the questions you need to ask. And of course, one of those questions relates to, all of the aspects of certification. What I can say it is more related to what I know in terms of the biometric piece. But, as Patrick said, the biometrics is only one part, you know, and there's many, many other parts. So hopefully Adam can help there. And this good practice framework may also be a good resource for you. So in the biometric piece, of course, I talked today a lot about the biometric component certification. And so I think this is a good step for, and I like how you said one-to-one verification, because I should have really pointed that out, that that's a key part of what we do in this certification is only one-to-one verification. We don't certify one-to-many right now, because the FIDO use case is focused right now mostly on authentication scenarios and then the remote identity proofing. And so I think beyond that, there are many other parts, you know, so hopefully maybe Adam can fill you in on that.
Sure, thanks, Stephanie. I think probably the answer to this is to think about the real requirements in that particular country. And it's interesting that the question mentioned, I think it was 100,000 to 10 million, Patrick, which is quite small numbers, really, in many cases. So I think you need to think about, in that case, what's actually going to be required by users and what's going to be most appropriate for users in that country. Because we have different modalities with biometrics as well. So we need to think about, are we going to capture the full 10 fingerprints? Are we going to capture face and iris as well? Do we really need to do that in that particular country? And think about how biometrics are going to be used. Are we looking for unique identification in this case or not? I mean, that's not always necessarily a requirement, believe it or not. Do we need different modalities for authentication or not, for example? I mean, is that actually going to be used by people? So that will drive a lot of the requirements for the ABIS itself, because that will determine then, well, how often is matching going to be required by that ABIS, so we can do mass registration. If it's 100,000 people, that's not actually that great, really, to do one to N. So all of these factors will determine physically what that ABIS looks like. Yes, absolutely, there's the underlying standards like the NIST specifications that are very important to make sure that whatever biometric matching system that is implemented is reliable, because that's important. But it will vary as the sort of type of product and the capability and its scalability as well. So all of these factors have to be taken into account as part of a wider solution. I think Stephanie's point about the Biometrics Institute is very valid. There's lots of good resources there that are helpful in this case. But I'll just throw another sort of slightly controversial one on the table, which sort of goes slightly outside the bounds of this conversation. But at the very lower end of numbers, if we're talking sort of 100,000 or even lower numbers in a country, you have to question sometimes whether you actually need biometrics at all. And that's a question to consider as well. So is it actually appropriate to have an ABIS in the first place? Yes or no? But that's for a separate, separate presentation.
Well, on that line, there's a question: do you need biometrics if you have a good performing civil registration system issuing UINs from birth, unique identification?
I can pick up on that if you like. So yes, having a very solid civil registration system is massively important to any digital ID system, really. We rely, as I said earlier in my presentation, on government data sets to be able to prove who people are. So having a unique identifier from birth can be useful. If it's a low-size population, as I mentioned before, actually that might be good enough. And in some cases it is. You may capture a biometric at the time of registration as well, but you don't necessarily need to do biometric deduplication at that point. And that's because in such low numbers of population, it's often very easy to identify people anyway, because we don't have such risk associated with large numbers of people, because of lower risks of fraud, for example. So that's one consideration. But yes, what I would say in that most circumstances, it's very important to have that underlying civil registration, yes, or other national data sets. But it is important quite often from a protecting our identity point of view and the use of that identity to also capture those biometrics and also go through the deduplication process, because that will help us to identify where we have fraud in the system, where we have multiple registrations, which happens sometimes, but also where we might have impersonation during the process of enrollment. So I think it is important as a security feature, definitely. I don't think there's any one circumstance apart from low populations where you would definitely rule out biometrics.
Yeah, I agree with that. I raised this topic by bringing up the issue of twins. So the question goes, how can the civil registry data or attribute data be used in complementing biometrics data in preventing fraud, especially in cases of twins? Is there research? So are you aware of anybody noting twins in databases?
I'm not personally aware of that, no. I am aware of it actually happening for real in real ID systems where we've identified twins at enrollment. I think if civil registration systems did record the fact that an individual is a twin, as you mentioned in your presentation, that would be helpful. But I'm certainly not aware of that being universal. Yeah,
I think it would be new to do that. It's been discussed at ICAO in the passport context, but I don't think any action has been taken. Stephanie, any thoughts on twins? Multimodality, of course, is a solution, I think, but maybe not at birth.
Yeah, I was going to say that. You know, the value of face, you know, is so clear because we've used face for so many years. It is a natural part of identifying each other, and the technology has gotten so good. It just works so well and it's so natural. However, this is a problem, and this is, as was said, a fundamental problem that we might not be able to solve. And so this is where the multiple modalities really can help. You know, so of course, fingerprint has also been a natural part of identification in many systems, and that's clearly a way you can duplicate two twins or provide a protection against ensuring that you've separated two twins. And iris is the same. And I think what's kind of interesting about iris, and sort of not to forget about it, is that it is part of the face, and so a well-done iris system could potentially help with this problem. And I used iris on my mobile device years ago, and of course it's not available today, but it was very useful and very handy. You know, so I think there'll be changes as time goes on, you know, and reconsideration of fingerprint as a second factor, or something like iris, you know, to help with some of these issues. And it's obviously going to be very use case dependent. So it's definitely something I would keep in your mind as the evolution may occur, and not just kind of maybe future-proof yourself a little bit, you know, that it's face and only face at all times.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Back to standards here in digital identity, there's a question here. ISO, W3C, etc. for digital identity, which standard is the best, especially to share data all over the world? To me, the standards come in layers. We go from very low layers to very high layers. Digital identity is a big topic. Adam, you're the expert here.
So I don't think you could point to one standard and say for digital identity, that's the best standard. Kind of as Patrick was just saying, they all have different focuses and different purposes. I would say that there are certain standards that you should consider as part of a collection. I quite often refer to NIST 863. It's been around for a while. It's been the basis of many other developments globally. It's founded in not just the US work, but it's a collaboration actually, but between other countries, and that's how we got to the first version of NIST 863. I was involved in that when I was in the UK government many years ago. So that's a great one for identity verification. It also has NIST 863B, which talks about authentication, which is also interesting. I would say at that point there's a divergence. And there's a model that's presented in NIST 863. There are different models as well that are presented in other standards. There are some ISO standards, older ones even, that go back to things like 29115 and others, which talk about different levels of assurance and levels of trust and different authentication methods. And these are quite varied. I would say a lot of the choice often gets driven out of the requirements of a particular system as to which standards you actually require. But if we think about we need to identify people, then the NIST standard is very good. There are also alternatives. You could look at what's been done in Europe, for example, with the IDAS and how it's taken on sort of bits of NIST and bits of ISO and come to its own conclusions. And other countries have done this too. So I think there's not one single standard. What we need to have is a collection, and you said layers, Patrick, I think that's a good way of putting it. We need standards for biometrics, we need standards for identity verification, we need standards for authentication. If we're building wallets, we need standards for credentials and how we communicate between issuers and holders of credentials and verifiers. So we need standards there. For me, one of the underlying themes of all of this is interoperability. Because we want to, as I think my first slide today was I was talking about the fact that if we want to really get the power of digital identity, then it needs to be reusable and it needs to be interoperable. Because I need to be able to use it in lots of different situations and lots of places and to have it be trusted in all those circumstances. So we need to be able to have trust in issuance, have trust in how we authenticate ourselves, and have trust in the way we can interoperate between different systems reliably. And that's the power of standards for me.
Yeah, right, let's move on. It's maybe on a related topic. I mean, FIDO is a set of standards. What are the current limitations of FIDO authentication in large-scale identity systems or government-level deployments? So FIDO has got a domain of use, the commercial domain of use. And so the question is maybe inappropriate. What do you think, Stephanie?
Yeah, good question. So FIDO is specific for authentication. So it's not solving that first step, right? That, creating your identity, having a digital identity. But I think it's absolutely useful for government use cases for authentication. Why is that? Because what's your alternative, right? So let's think about the things that we can do today if you want to authenticate a person. You can do a password. We all know that that's pretty well broken. So we all know about multi-factor. Great, let's do multi-factor. Absolutely should be doing multi-factor, and not a single factor. But the problem with our multi-factor systems is they don't work very well. And they don't work very well on both sides of the coin. So if we think of things like the one-time password, why does that not work? Well, it's a pain for the real person to now work and juggle with this second factor of a one-time password. But the other reason why it doesn't work is because the fraudsters know how to attack it. And they attack it through things like phishing attacks. So they find ways to convince you to give them their code. And they can scale that so easily. And AI has only made them be able to kind of supercharge the phishing attacks because they look more legitimate and they can do it in quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. So they can do thousands and thousands of them and they only need a few people to fall for it. and then it can mount further attacks down the line. Both kind of monetary or informational, or planting the seed, for further attacks. So no, absolutely, you should, as a government, consider adopting FIDO, because your alternatives, are susceptible, I couldn't think of the word, to attack. And it's because that's the weakest link right now. In cybersecurity is the authentication step. And this is about plugging the holes. Is FIDO absolutely perfect? No, it's not, but it's definitely miles above what we have today. And you should consider adopting it.
Adam, you just heard Stephanie argue for exporting FIDO into government use cases, authentication. Any reaction?
I mean, I'm actually in favor of providing users with multiple methods of authenticating. Yes, FIDO may well be appropriate in many cases. Stephanie's absolutely right. There are huge issues with phishing attacks. Using SMS is just fraught with danger. In fact, I'm pretty sure in 863 that was deprecated some years ago as a method of authentication. But so yes, FIDO may well be one answer. In my experience, there are other ways we can do this as well. And I think I would personally focus on the requirements again. I would specify very strongly what it is we're trying to protect against. But yes, FIDO is absolutely one of those solutions that can do that.
Yeah, okay. We have 4 minutes to go. Slido is still open. Let me pick another question here. We've had questions directed at NIST and the World Bank, so I'll take one for NIST. But how is NIST addressing the threat of deepfake and morphing attacks in biometric systems? So NIST does measurement. We run benchmarks. We have, for maybe 5 years now, been looking at morph detection technologies. We are producing a guidance document on can you deploy those technologies. They are recently commercially available. There's a higher level of commercial awareness of the morphing detection market. Pretty much many border crossings are open to passports that have been issued in untrusted circumstances. The passport may be digitally signed, but the face may have come from a morphing process. And that passport may cross a border. So border crossing agencies need to be aware of this. It applies to other credentials as well, where the face is potentially not trusted. The NIST activity is on measurement and on writing guidelines. We are active in ISO. ISO has also work going on in morph detection. And I think it'll continue. It's certainly not the same level of magnitude as deepfakes and injection of deepfakes, nor presentation attack. Injection attacks scale. They can be industrialized, as Adam put it, but morphing is nevertheless out there. Another question to NIST came, where did it go? Oh, I've lost it. Stephanie, I'm going to pivot because I can't find the question. There's a question in French and in English on the same topic. What is the recommended minimum age for biometric data capture in children? You have worked on this as much as anyone. You have databases and ongoing collections. What's your answer?
Was a modality specified?
Was the what specified?
Was the modality specified?
No, biometrics in children.
Just said biometric.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So it's obviously related to the biometric modality. So this is a very active area of work across the world, And so I think Patrick highlighted a fingerprint as an example and talked about fingerprint. So fingerprint needs a high resolution scanner, for sure below, say, age 10, to get reasonable performance. And so once you have a high resolution scanner, there's been research to show that, I think we all are aware that our fingers grow as we age. And so what you want then is you've got your high resolution scanner. You also need a algorithm that can scale the fingerprint appropriately to account for the growth of the finger. But if you have those two things, fingerprint can work even to a very, very young age. Right after birth, there's definitely some challenges, but within the first few days and definitely within the first few months, it is possible to use fingerprint in children. So that's kind of maybe my top in terms of early age. Face is obviously something we talked a lot about and something super useful. We've been doing research on face. For our open source algorithms, we're seeing that a face can be matched, really reliably up to 4 years. But we've have some recent work, which we haven't published, looking at commercial algorithms, and I think the time is actually a good bit longer than 8 years that face reliably works. So that's pretty awesome to see that change, because that change has been very recent in terms of the most advanced algorithms. No, I'm now taking a lot of time. So I'll just say quickly, iris works great, doesn't age, hard to capture when the children are, say, below 4.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. You won't have heard it, but a very traditionally sounding bell just rang here. And so we are at time, and I have to thank you all for attending and close this session.